The missing 1,000 years of human history, what the Vatican doesn't want you to know. For centuries, history has been presented as a continuous and structured timeline, an unbroken chain of events stretching from antiquity to the modern age. But what if that timeline was not as solid as we believe? What if entire centuries of our past had been fabricated, erased, or manipulated to serve a greater purpose? This is the core of what some call the phantom time hypothesis, a theory suggesting that up to 300 to 1,000 years of recorded history never actually happened. It's a bold claim, one that challenges the very foundation of how we perceive time itself. At the heart of this theory lies a deep and unsettling question. Could the Middle Ages, as we know them, be nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion? To understand this mystery, we must first examine how we measure time itself. Modern history relies on calendars, astronomical records, and written chronicles. Yet if we dig deeper, inconsistencies begin to emerge. Gaps in documentation, missing archaeological evidence, and even discrepancies in celestial observations that contradict official timelines. The most controversial version of this theory was proposed by German historian Heribert Illig in the 1990s. Illig claimed that the years between 614 AD and 911 AD never actually existed and were added to historical records much later. According to him, this alteration was not merely a mistake, but a deliberate manipulation of time orchestrated by powerful figures. But why would someone invent centuries of history? The answer may lie in one of the most influential institutions of the medieval world, the Catholic Church. If we consider the reach of the Vatican, an entity that dictated not only religious doctrine, but also political structures, it becomes clear that controlling history meant controlling power. During the early medieval period, Europe was fragmented, plagued by wars, famines, and a lack of centralized governance. Yet, despite this turmoil, certain historical figures seemed to rise out of nowhere: fully formed empires, sudden technological advancements, and rulers whose stories feel more like myth than reality. Could it be that some of these events were inserted into history to create a more structured and authoritative past? A key aspect of the phantom time hypothesis is the strangely uniform history of different regions, despite their lack of communication. In theory, if certain centuries were added artificially, we would expect to see similar historical patterns repeated across different civilizations, as if a template had been applied to ensure continuity. This idea raises a disturbing possibility. Did ancient scribes and historians fabricate entire dynasties, wars, and discoveries to fit a rewritten history? One of the most perplexing anomalies supporting this theory is found in astronomical records. If we assume the recorded timeline is correct, celestial events, such as eclipses and planetary alignments, should align perfectly with modern calculations. However, some discrepancies suggest that either historical accounts of these events were fabricated, or our timeline is off by centuries. Perhaps even more concerning is the fact that no solid archaeological evidence supports the existence of entire centuries in certain regions. For instance, large sections of medieval European history rely on texts rather than physical ruins. Where are the cities, roads, and artifacts that should exist in abundance if these centuries truly occurred as recorded? And yet the most chilling aspect of this theory is not just the potential loss of historical accuracy, but the implications it has on our perception of reality. If time itself can be rewritten, how much of what we believe to be history is real? This question brings us closer to the heart of the conspiracy. If this timeline was manipulated, who was responsible, and what were they trying to hide? Aqui está o capítulo revisado sem subtítulos intermediários, mantendo apenas o título principal. If entire centuries were fabricated or erased from history, the next logical question is, where is the proof? While mainstream historians dismiss the phantom time hypothesis as speculation, certain anomalies cannot be easily ignored. From medieval manuscripts with inconsistencies to royal genealogies that appear suspiciously manufactured, the case for missing centuries continues to grow. One of the most striking arguments supporting the theory is the odd uniformity of medieval history across multiple civilizations. Europe, the Byzantine Empire, and even certain Asian dynasties seem to have undergone strangely parallel developments, despite the vast distances between them and the lack of effective communication methods at the time. It's as if history had been written following a pre-existing template rather than organic events unfolding naturally. Take, for instance, the early Middle Ages in Europe, often referred to as the Dark Ages, due to the lack of significant progress. The period between 614 AD and 911 AD is particularly vague, with very few contemporary documents or significant archaeological findings. Many of the written records that describe this time come from much later sources, often compiled or rewritten by monks and scholars under the control of the Church. But it's not just Europe that presents this problem. If these centuries truly existed as recorded, we would expect a consistent historical timeline across the world. Instead, we find peculiar gaps in the records of China, Persia, and even parts of the Islamic world. If these civilizations had been thriving independently, why do their histories lack the clarity we see in later periods? One of the most famous figures of medieval Europe is Charlemagne, the great Frankish king who united much of Western Europe and was crowned emperor by the Pope in 800 AD. His reign is often described as the foundation of what would become the Holy Roman Empire. Yet some researchers point to major inconsistencies in his biographies, military campaigns, and political reforms. For example, Charlemagne is credited with an astonishing number of military victories and administrative reforms that would have been nearly impossible to achieve within a single lifetime. Some go as far as to suggest that Charlemagne was either greatly exaggerated or entirely invented as a mythical figure to serve as a unifying symbol for Europe's fragmented territories. Historians who support the phantom time hypothesis argue that the Holy Roman Empire needed a powerful historical figure to justify its authority. If centuries were fabricated, then it is possible that rulers like Charlemagne never existed in the way we have been told, but were instead placed into history to create a continuous and controlled narrative. The Catholic Church played an essential role in recording and preserving history during the medieval period. Monks copied manuscripts, maintained official records, and often decided which texts were worth preserving and which should be forgotten. If an institution had the means, influence, and motivation to control the historical narrative, the Vatican would be the primary suspect. Could it be that missing centuries were part of a grander design to ensure that the power structure of the Church remained unchallenged? One possibility is that historical records were manipulated to align with certain theological and political objectives. If parts of history did not fit the Church's vision, could they have been altered or erased altogether? It would not be the first time that information had been suppressed to protect institutional authority. Even more suspiciously, when scholars attempt to trace historical records from these lost centuries, they often find themselves relying on religious documents rather than independent sources. If history had unfolded naturally, we would expect a variety of sources, letters, contracts, chronicles, and trade documents to corroborate the timeline. Instead, much of what we know about these centuries comes directly from the Church's archives. Perhaps one of the strongest pieces of evidence supporting the phantom time hypothesis comes from astronomy. Our ability to track celestial events such as solar eclipses and planetary alignments allows us to verify historical records with extreme accuracy. If historical accounts are correct, the recorded positions of the stars should match modern calculations. However, some astronomers claim that there are discrepancies in the celestial observations recorded during the early medieval period. Certain eclipses documented in historical sources do not align with where they should have appeared in the sky, according to modern astronomy. If our historical timeline was perfectly accurate, these celestial records should match precisely. The fact that they don't raises the question, did these events actually happen in the years they were recorded, or was history rewritten? If nearly 300 years of history were invented, we would expect to find major gaps in archaeology, and that is exactly what we see in certain regions. Some medieval cities, castles, and roads appear suddenly in the 10th and 11th centuries, as if civilization had skipped several centuries of development. If historians claim that major construction projects were happening in the lost centuries, where are the ruins? In Rome, for example, some researchers note that there is little architectural development recorded between the 7th and 10th centuries. The same is true for various European towns and cities that supposedly existed during this period, yet show little evidence of expansion. Could it be that historians retroactively inserted events and rulers into history to fill the gaps? If centuries were indeed fabricated, then the real question becomes, what was being hidden? Was it simply a matter of creating a false sense of historical continuity? Or was there a deeper secret that needed to be erased? Some speculate that this lost time may have covered up a radical change in power, an event that reshaped religion, or even knowledge that would have altered humanity's understanding of history itself. Whatever the case, we have been taught a version of history that may not be as reliable as we once believed. As we continue, we will delve deeper into the anomalies surrounding medieval documents, rewritten chronicles, and suppressed knowledge that point to one of the greatest historical conspiracies ever conceived. Throughout the centuries, the Vatican has held an unparalleled influence over recorded history. As the guardian of ancient texts, religious doctrines, and even political affairs, its control extended far beyond spiritual matters. But could it have also played a role in shaping, perhaps even fabricating, entire segments of human history? To understand the Vatican's immense power, we must go back to the early Middle Ages. During this period, the Catholic Church was not merely a religious institution. It was the supreme authority over kingdoms, empires, and even the dissemination of knowledge. The ruling elite depended on the church for legitimacy, meaning that if certain historical truths were inconvenient, they could be edited, rewritten, or erased. One of the most significant ways the Vatican shaped history was through its control of manuscripts. The majority of historical records in medieval Europe were copied and preserved in monasteries. If a document contained information that contradicted the Church's teachings or political goals, it could be altered, censored, or simply left out of the official records. Since common people did not have access to written history, they relied solely on what the Church allowed them to know. The Gregorian calendar is another fascinating clue that raises questions about the Vatican's influence over time itself. In 1582, Pope Gregory XIII introduced a major reform that adjusted the previous Julian calendar by removing 10 days. Officially, this was done to correct discrepancies caused by the misalignment of the Julian system with the solar year. But what if this was not merely an adjustment? What if it was part of a larger manipulation? Could it be that missing centuries were hidden within the gaps of chronological shifts? Some theorists argue that calendar reforms may have been used to obscure the true passage of time, reinforcing the idea that certain periods of history never truly happened. Adding to the mystery, there are certain historical figures who seem suspiciously mythological in nature. While most historians accept their existence, there is often little direct evidence beyond religious or state-sponsored accounts. For instance, Constantine the Great, the Roman emperor who legalized Christianity in 313 AD, is revered as a transformative leader. However, some records of his life and actions appear inconsistent, and his true motivations remain a subject of debate. If historical timelines were manipulated, could some of these legendary rulers have been exaggerated or even fabricated? Even beyond figures like Constantine and Charlemagne, there are records of entire dynasties that suddenly appear with little archaeological backing. If entire families of rulers were inserted into history to legitimize political structures, then how much of what we accept as historical fact is truly accurate? The Catholic Church has long been suspected of suppressing knowledge that could challenge its authority. From the destruction of the Library of Alexandria to the secret Vatican archives, there are countless examples of information being hidden from the public. One of the most enduring mysteries involves the rumored existence of lost books of history, science, and prophecy locked away in the Vatican's private vaults. Some claim that within these hidden texts lie records of advanced civilizations, lost technologies, or alternative accounts of human origins that directly contradict mainstream teaching. One of the most infamous periods of censorship was the Inquisition, during which countless documents were destroyed and those who questioned official doctrines were silenced, often through brutal means. Could this have been a way to erase any surviving records of the missing centuries? Adding to this speculation, certain medieval texts reference earlier histories that no longer exist today. If these lost books once documented a version of history different from what we have been taught, their disappearance is highly suspicious. Perhaps one of the most compelling arguments for historical manipulation is the lack of technological progress during the so-called Dark Ages. If we accept the traditional timeline, humanity went from building architectural marvels like the Roman aqueducts and Greek temples to centuries of stagnation, only to suddenly emerge in the Renaissance with renewed advancements. Could it be that this dark period was simply inserted into history to create an artificial gap? Was their knowledge lost or intentionally suppressed to maintain control over human development? If history was manipulated, who were the real beneficiaries? The Vatican's influence ensured that monarchs, emperors, and even scholars adhered to a narrative that reinforced their power. Any deviations from this sanctioned history were treated as heresy or conspiracy. Even today, scholars attempting to challenge official history face academic suppression, loss of credibility, and lack of institutional support. If historical manipulation occurred in the past, could similar practices still be at play? The deeper we dig into the anomalies of history, the clearer it becomes that something is missing. The Vatican's role in preserving and controlling knowledge suggests that what we know today may be just a fragment of the full picture. Vou expandir o capítulo para atingir as 1000 palavras necessárias, aprofundando as análises e adicionando mais contexto para fortalecer os argumentos. Aqui está a versão revisada e ampliada. One of the most perplexing aspects of the missing 1,000 years is the absence of solid archaeological evidence for entire historical periods. While mainstream historians argue that the Middle Ages were a time of slow progress and decay, the inconsistencies in the physical record suggest a more complicated story. Consider the Roman Empire, a civilization renowned for its engineering marvels, extensive road networks, and massive urban centers. According to conventional history, much of this progress was lost during the so-called Dark Ages. But if this is true, why do some medieval structures and technologies appear far ahead of their time? Archaeologists have discovered anomalies that challenge the traditional narrative. Some medieval buildings show construction techniques that were supposedly lost for centuries after the fall of Rome. Cathedrals, for example, feature intricate designs and mathematical precision that should have been impossible given the supposed technological decline. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence comes from carbon dating inconsistencies. Some medieval sites have been found to be much younger than historical records suggest, raising questions about the accuracy of our timeline. If historical events were misdated or even fabricated, then many of our assumptions about the past may need to be re-evaluated. Ancient maps also provide clues. The famous Piri Reis map, dated to 1513, depicts parts of Antarctica with striking accuracy, despite the fact that the continent was supposedly undiscovered until centuries later. Some researchers believe this map, and others like it, hint at lost knowledge that contradicts mainstream historical timelines. Even more mysterious are the artifacts that seem to belong to no known civilization. Objects like the Antikythera mechanism, an ancient Greek device that functions as an analog computer, defy conventional explanations. How could such advanced technology exist in an era supposedly dominated by superstition and decline? The idea that history has been selectively recorded is not new. Many ancient civilizations have left behind structures and texts that suggest a vastly different version of history than the one we are taught. The question remains, were these anomalies deliberately erased, or did they simply not fit into the accepted historical framework? The enigmatic manuscripts and the disappearance of historical texts. Another mystery surrounding these lost centuries is the disappearance of key manuscripts. Throughout history, countless libraries have been destroyed, and with them, knowledge that may have rewritten the accepted timeline of events. The most famous case is the Library of Alexandria, which housed texts from all over the known world before being burned down under mysterious circumstances. Similarly, the Vatican Library is rumored to contain suppressed documents, scrolls and manuscripts that detail events and figures that contradict mainstream historical accounts. Some researchers believe these records may hold alternative timelines or information about advanced knowledge lost over time. An example of this is the Book of Enoch, an ancient Jewish text that describes interactions with supernatural beings and celestial knowledge. Though it was excluded from most versions of the Bible, fragments of the text were discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls, proving its historical authenticity. The question remains, why was it removed? Did it contain knowledge that certain authorities wanted to keep hidden? Architectural anomalies and the rewriting of history. In addition to lost texts, the structures left behind by ancient civilizations also tell a puzzling story. Many medieval buildings, particularly Gothic cathedrals, feature symbols, mathematical alignments, and construction techniques that should have been lost knowledge at the time. Some believe this suggests that an advanced understanding of engineering persisted in secret circles, possibly connected to groups like the Knights Templar or other esoteric societies. Another unexplained phenomenon is the sudden appearance of advanced architecture in regions where such expertise supposedly did not exist. Some medieval European castles have defensive features and stonework that rival even the most advanced Roman fortresses. If the technology to build such structures was supposedly lost, then how did medieval builders rediscover it so suddenly? There is also the case of megalithic structures like Göbekli Tepe, a site in Turkey dating back over 12,000 years. Its intricate carvings and massive stone pillars suggest a level of sophistication far beyond what historians believed was possible for that time. Could it be that history as we know it is missing an entire advanced civilization? Suppressed historical evidence and the role of the Vatican. The Vatican remains at the center of many historical mysteries. Its archives, one of the most secretive and well-guarded collections of documents in the world, are believed to contain records that could challenge accepted historical timelines. One of the most controversial theories is that the Church played a role in shaping the historical record to solidify its authority. By controlling what information was disseminated, it may have erased or altered parts of history that did not align with its teachings. For example, some claim that certain historical figures, such as Jesus or early Christian leaders, may have had entirely different roles than those recorded in the official canon. Others suggest that knowledge about the true nature of time, the cosmos, and humanity's origins was hidden away to prevent disruption to the established order. The lost artifacts, suppressed manuscripts, and architectural anomalies all point to one undeniable conclusion. History is not as clear-cut as we have been led to believe. If entire centuries have been manipulated, misdated, or erased, then our understanding of the past is fundamentally flawed. As we continue to investigate, the evidence suggests that the missing 1,000 years were anything but uneventful. Could it be that humanity experienced an alternate timeline, one that was later rewritten to fit a specific narrative? The deeper we go, the more questions arise, making it clear that the truth about history may be far stranger than we ever imagined. Aqui está a continuação do roteiro, com o próximo capítulo expandido para atingir as 1000 palavras. What if the missing 1,000 years of history never actually happened? This theory, known as the phantom time hypothesis, suggests that significant portions of recorded history, particularly between 614 and 911 AD, were completely fabricated. The idea was first proposed by German historian Heribert Illig in the 1990s. According to Illig, there is a substantial lack of archaeological and historical evidence supporting the events that supposedly took place during this period. The gap in reliable records, inconsistencies in medieval documents, and anomalies in the Gregorian calendar all point to the possibility that entire centuries were inserted into the timeline. But why would history be altered on such a massive scale? Some researchers argue that this was a deliberate act orchestrated by powerful figures of the time, including the Holy Roman Emperor Otto III and Pope Sylvester II. Their alleged motivation? To fabricate a historical legacy that aligned with their rule and to make it seem as though they were reigning in the millennial year 1000, a time of great religious significance. The calendar conspiracy, how time was manipulated. One of the most compelling arguments for the phantom time hypothesis is the issue of the calendar. Our current Gregorian calendar was introduced by Pope Gregory III in 1582 as a correction to the Julian calendar. However, when this change was made, it was discovered that the Julian calendar had drifted by 10 days due to miscalculations over the centuries. Here's where it gets strange. If nearly 1,600 years had passed since the Julian calendar was established in 45 BC, the error should have been closer to 13 days, not 10. This discrepancy suggests that roughly 300 years were either miscalculated or artificially added. This raises an even bigger question. If those missing years never happened, then what historical events were actually real? The mysterious gap in records and the lack of artifacts. Another strange anomaly is the lack of documented innovation during this period. Between 600 and 900 AD, there was supposedly a dramatic decline in technological advancements, cultural development, and population growth. This is highly unusual because every other recorded historical period shows gradual development, even during times of war or instability. For example, during the Roman era, we see clear records of technological progress, engineering feats, and political events. After 900 AD, we again see an explosion of architecture, trade, and military innovation. But during the supposed Dark Ages, historical documentation is sparse, and very few archaeological artifacts have been discovered that date specifically to this period. Could it be that these years were inserted retroactively to fill in a gap that never actually existed? Strange anomalies in historical records. Another key argument supporting the phantom time hypothesis is the presence of repeated events in history. Certain wars, reigns of kings, and religious milestones appear to be suspiciously similar to one another, almost as if they were duplicated or rewritten. One example is the eerie similarities between the reign of Roman Emperor Augustus and the rule of Charlemagne. Both leaders were credited with expanding their empires, reforming their military forces, and centralizing power. However, some researchers argue that Charlemagne may never have existed as an individual ruler, but rather was an amalgamation of various historical figures. Even medieval art adds to the mystery. Certain depictions of kings, cities, and religious figures from the 7th and 8th centuries look strikingly similar to those from centuries earlier, as if they were simply reimagined versions of older portraits. If history was rewritten, then what else might have been altered? Who would have benefited from rewriting history? If entire centuries were fabricated, who stood to gain from this deception? One of the leading theories is that the Catholic Church and the Holy Roman Empire played a significant role in shaping the timeline. By erasing or modifying history, they could establish a sense of divine legitimacy for their rule, creating a continuous historical narrative that placed them at the center of world events. This manipulation would also help explain why certain texts were banned or destroyed. If there were records that contradicted the accepted timeline, they would need to be removed to maintain the illusion of continuity. Furthermore, the idea that time itself was altered ties into deeper esoteric and spiritual theories. Some believe that human consciousness was artificially reset, keeping humanity in a controlled loop where history repeats itself in cycles without true progress. Could it be that by modifying time, those in power were able to maintain a specific form of control over human civilization? The implications of a fabricated past. If even a fraction of the phantom time hypothesis is true, then the implications are staggering. It would mean that our understanding of history is based on a carefully crafted illusion where events were strategically placed to create a version of the past that serves a particular narrative. More importantly, it raises the question, what else has been manipulated? If entire centuries can be added or removed from history, what does that say about our present and future? The evidence, while controversial, suggests that history is not as linear as we have been led to believe. The missing years could be more than just a simple error in the historical record. They could be the key to understanding how power, knowledge, and time itself have been shaped to control humanity. And if we have been living in an altered timeline, what does that mean for the truth of our own existence? Aqui está o capítulo ajustado sem os subtítulos internos, mantendo apenas o título principal do capítulo. For centuries, the Vatican has held an unparalleled influence over historical narratives, religious doctrine, and even the perception of time itself. But could it be that the Catholic Church played a direct role in shaping, or even fabricating, entire segments of human history? If the phantom time hypothesis holds any truth, then the Vatican emerges as a key suspect in the grand deception of lost centuries. The Catholic Church has long positioned itself as the guardian of divine truth, claiming direct succession from the apostles of Christ. But with this power came the ability to dictate what was considered historical fact and what was deemed heretical. Throughout history, the Vatican has been involved in suppressing certain texts, altering religious calendars, and rewriting theological doctrines to fit its agenda. If time itself has been manipulated, could it be that the Church played a role in orchestrating this grand illusion? One of the most compelling pieces of evidence linking the Vatican to historical manipulation is its involvement in controlling which books were included in the official biblical canon. Throughout history, numerous texts were deemed heretical and subsequently banned or destroyed. These include the Gnostic Gospels, the Book of Enoch, and various apocryphal writings that contradict the mainstream biblical narrative. But what if some of these suppressed texts contained information that threatened the established timeline? What if they revealed events, rulers, or entire epochs that contradicted the fabricated chronology? There is also the Vatican's secret archives, one of the most restricted and mysterious collections of documents in the world, containing over 50 miles of shelving with ancient manuscripts, some dating back over 1,000 years. These archives hold knowledge that has never been made public. What secrets about history, time, and lost civilizations might be locked away behind those walls? If historical events were indeed manipulated, then the Vatican's control over written records becomes even more suspicious. Could it be that entire centuries were erased, modified, or even invented to align with religious and political ambitions? The timeline of history is largely dictated by the calendar system we use today, but few people realize just how much the Catholic Church was involved in shaping it. In 1582, Pope Gregory XIII introduced the Gregorian calendar, which replaced the Julian calendar. The official reason for this reform was to correct inaccuracies in the measurement of time caused by the Julian system, which miscalculated the length of a year. However, the correction only required a shift of 10 days, not 300 years. The question is, why was there a discrepancy in the first place? Could it be that the Church was not merely adjusting the calendar, but actively correcting inconsistencies that arose due to the insertion of phantom years? Furthermore, many ancient cultures measured time differently, using celestial alignments rather than arbitrary dates. Could it be that older civilizations followed a more accurate timeline, one that was later altered to suit the Church's control over time? The medieval period was a time when the Catholic Church wielded immense power over both religious and political affairs. The Pope was not just a spiritual leader, but also a political figure, influencing kings, emperors, and entire nations. By controlling history, the Church could establish a divine right to rule, presenting itself as the unbroken authority of God on earth. If historical events were rewritten, it would allow the Vatican to justify its claims of legitimacy, continuity, and prophecy. Additionally, if entire periods of time were fabricated, it would serve as a powerful tool to control religious prophecy. By manipulating the timeline, certain biblical prophecies could be made to appear fulfilled, reinforcing the Church's dominance and silencing any opposition. Could it be that the Vatican was not just the guardian of history, but the architect of an elaborate illusion designed to shape reality itself? If the missing centuries were truly invented, it raises a profound question. What is time? There are esoteric theories suggesting that time is not a fixed linear sequence, but a malleable construct that can be altered, manipulated, or even erased. Some researchers believe that the concept of time has been deliberately distorted to keep humanity trapped in a repetitive cycle of history, ensuring that power remains concentrated in the hands of the elite. From a theological perspective, this aligns with ancient beliefs that time was once perceived differently by early civilizations. Many ancient texts describe time as something that could be stretched, condensed, or even reset by divine forces. Could it be that those in power, whether religious or political, have access to knowledge about time that has been hidden from the general public? If true, this means that our entire perception of history could be an illusion designed to serve a higher agenda. If the Vatican and other powerful entities truly manipulated time, what does that mean for our current reality? Firstly, it would suggest that many of the historical narratives we accept as truth are fabrications. Events we believe to be ancient may not be as old as we think, and some civilizations we assume to be lost may have existed far more recently than recorded history suggests. Secondly, if history can be rewritten, then what else can be altered? If time itself is malleable, then does this mean that other forms of reality, such as consciousness, memory, and even existence, are also subject to manipulation? And finally, what if we are currently living in another phase of historical revision? If history was fabricated once, could it be happening again right now? The Vatican remains one of the most secretive institutions in the world, holding vast knowledge that has never been revealed to the public. If the truth about time manipulation is hidden within its archives, will we ever know the real story? Or are we destined to live in a version of history that was carefully designed for us? Aqui está a continuação do roteiro, mantendo a estrutura sem subtítulos internos e garantindo que a transição seja fluida. If entire centuries were fabricated or erased, it begs the question, What else has been hidden from us? What other aspects of our past have been manipulated, rewritten, or completely erased from human memory? Throughout history, civilizations have risen and fallen, leaving behind ruins, texts, and artifacts. But what if some of the most crucial discoveries have been deliberately suppressed? If historical records can be rewritten, then the suppression of knowledge is not just a possibility, it is a certainty. One of the most controversial theories surrounding hidden history involves lost civilizations. Could it be that human civilization is much older than we've been led to believe? The official timeline suggests that advanced societies only began to emerge within the last 5,000 years, but evidence continues to surface that challenges this narrative. Take Göbekli Tepe, for example, a massive temple complex in Turkey that predates Stonehenge by thousands of years. It was deliberately buried as if someone wanted it to be forgotten. Who built it? Why was it covered up? And could it be a remnant of an even older lost civilization? Similarly, myths from around the world speak of ancient advanced societies that mysteriously disappeared. Atlantis, Lemuria, and other lost continents have been dismissed as legend, but what if these stories are echoes of real historical events? If time has been altered, then the rise and fall of these civilizations may have been strategically removed from history. If history can be rewritten, then what about the origins of religion? Many religious texts have undergone extensive editing, translation, and censorship. If certain books were excluded from the Bible and other sacred scriptures, could it be that they contained knowledge that would contradict the accepted narrative? The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in the 1940s, provided a glimpse into ancient religious thought. But many scholars believe there are even more hidden texts locked away in secret archives. Could these lost scriptures contain alternative histories, ancient prophecies, or even records of past civilizations that were erased? If powerful institutions had the ability to rewrite history, they could also control prophecy. By adjusting the timeline, they could create the illusion that certain predictions have come true. Throughout history, religious prophecies have been used to shape events, justify wars, and maintain control. But if the missing centuries theory is correct, it would mean that some of these so-called fulfilled prophecies may have been strategically fabricated. This raises an unsettling question. If historical records can be altered, then what about current events? Could the manipulation of time still be happening today? If history can be erased, rewritten, and reshaped, then the same techniques could be used to control the present. In a world dominated by digital records, artificial intelligence, and mass surveillance, it is easier than ever to manipulate information. If historical records from the medieval era could be altered with handwritten documents and political influence, imagine how much easier it is today when digital information can be deleted, edited, or fabricated within seconds. Could it be that we are living in a new age of historical revision? If so, how would we even know? If history has been manipulated, then our perception of reality itself has been shaped by those in power. What we consider to be true may be nothing more than a carefully crafted illusion, designed to control what we believe, how we think, and even how we perceive time. If this is true, then the most important question remains: who is behind it all? And will we ever uncover the real truth? The missing years, the altered timelines, the hidden knowledge, could all of these be pieces of a much larger puzzle? One that we are only now beginning to glimpse? Perhaps the most important revelation is this: if history has been rewritten before, then it can be rewritten again. And if we want to find the truth, we must be willing to question everything we've been taught. If history is not as we've been told, then our entire understanding of civilization, religion, and even time itself could be based on a carefully constructed illusion. But what if this is only the beginning? If certain centuries were fabricated or erased, if knowledge was deliberately hidden, and if powerful institutions controlled what we could and could not know, then how much of our present is real? Throughout this journey, we've uncovered startling inconsistencies in the historical timeline, unexplained gaps in the record, and theories suggesting entire centuries may have never existed. We've examined the influence of the Vatican, questioned the role of secret societies, and explored the possibility that ancient knowledge has been systematically suppressed. But what if this was only scratching the surface? If the manipulation of history is real, then it means our understanding of time is fundamentally flawed. What if the concept of linear history, one event leading naturally to another, is itself an illusion? Could it be that history is cyclical, constantly being reset, rewritten and reintroduced under different names and disguises? Consider the striking similarities between different ancient civilizations, how myths, symbols, and even structures like pyramids appear in cultures separated by thousands of miles. Some say this is coincidence. Others argue that it is proof of a forgotten past, one that has been deliberately erased and reshaped into the fragmented history we now accept. If history has been rewritten before, then it is possible that we are living in a version of reality carefully designed to hide the truth. And if those in power have the ability to control the past, they also have the power to control the future. This leads to an even more unsettling thought. If history is an illusion, then so is prophecy. If timelines can be altered, events staged and narratives controlled, then what does it mean for the future we expect to unfold? Could the very prophecies that shape our world, those predicting the end of days, the rise of a global order, or even the return of a messianic figure, be part of a carefully constructed script designed not to predict the future, but to control it? If so, then what happens next? For centuries, people have waited for revelations, for signs, for the unveiling of long-hidden truths. But what if the greatest secret of all is that we are already living in the deception? What if the missing years, the fabricated centuries, and the hidden knowledge were never lost, but rather kept from us by those who decide what is real and what is forgotten? If history can be rewritten, then so can the future. And the only way to break free is to start questioning everything.